is. And if you go out for a drink with a founder, or downtime or off time, and you just happen to say, "What are you thinking about?" Guess what? It will be their business. It will be their idea. They just can't shut up or shut off, or shut up and shut off, and they're just on it all the time. So thirdly, vision and size. They can see something in the future that we can't. They can see the size of something and how they will challenge us with that vision. And they see it all the time, how the world will be. They see it now, and they invite us in. The challenge is, come in and join me on this journey to build this thing. How do they paint that vision for us to see as well as them? And then fourth, I'm interested in leadership and how their leadership builds the team. Their passion and their vision are what has enabled them to start building a team. It's what's attracted or magnetized, if you like, people to come and join them. And I always want to meet other people in the team to ask them if they are also as wedded to this mission, this vision that the founder is. And I want to find out about the founder, or from the founder, whether they can lead. And I talk about the split screen here. I got this idea about the split screen, that when somebody comes along to pitch to you and they put up their little PowerPoint presentation on the screen, it's natural, it's automatic that your attention is drawn to the slides and the presentation that they put up on the screen. But I like to try and look at that, and at the same time, the other view, the founder themselves. And while they're talking about what's up there that is attracting most people's attention, I'm asking myself, can this person deliver? Can they deliver what they promise, what they're promising in this pitch, that they will deliver in 5, 6, 7 years' time? Can they get me and my investment and all of our investments to this hockey stick place where the company is worth, X millions of pounds and exit it in 5, 6, 7 years' time? So next, I always mention storytelling. Can they tell a compelling story? Am I captivated by the idea? Am I drawn in? Do they know what my hot buttons are? Are they pressing the right buttons? I might be interested in status, wealth, impact. Have they worked out, what our hot buttons are? Are they plugging into the emotions that we need to experience? And I'm conscious of the fact that they might use certain tactics that I'm wary of and you should be wary of, which you'll know about when I mention them. FOMO, fear of missing out, scarcity. And founders can be quite clever in saying the sorts of things that make you think, oh, I better jump on now because, there's not going to be an opportunity for very much longer. They'll say things like, oh, we've raised 85% of the round. We've got to close it by Friday or Monday latest. There's not much time left, get on board. And big named people are joining the round. So, don't be left behind. And somebody pitched this to me a couple of weeks ago, which I thought was quite thoughtful, quite clever. They said something like, Phil, we are raising 10 million euros and we've committed to giving 9 million to institutional investors, but we've held back 1 million euros for angels just like you. And I thought, yeah, do I swallow that? Is that just rubbish? So I like to think that if founders really want your money, if you're the right investor, they'll take it. If you're, weeks late because they need the money. So you just have to ask yourself, do you really, really want to be part of this? Next, which I think is 6, market proof and market pull. You know what proof is? I've talked a bit about that already. Pull. First thing I'd say is about comprehension. Customers get the value of a product without needing an extensive explanation of it. If you can come up with an idea that eliminates the need to explain it in depth, then you can eliminate the need for an extensive sales force, because people get it, pretty much straight away. Second, value. Can you get consumers to perceive enough value to justify the labor involved, the price, the risk of switching to your product? Can you sell them the savings they'll make, the added functionality, the design benefits from your product or service? And third, the pull factor, I call enthusiasm. You need something that consumers want now. They can't wait for it. The enthusiasm of immediacy helps them overcome the friction of switching. 7, competitive advantage. Whenever we talk about competitive advantage, we think about IP, but most companies don't have any IP or very little IP, so they've got to find something else that's going to give them competitive advantage. And the first and foremost thing that gives companies competitive advantage is you yourself, the founder. What's giving this founder the advantage over others? Is that founder an authority in the space that they're trying to sell? Have they gone down the route of developing their personal brand? They've become a trusted advisor. Have they got insider knowledge? Have they built a moat? Have they got connections? Have they got partnerships with people? Have they recruited a great team so that team is giving them the competitive advantage for them? Then 8, financials. Do the projections reflect the market claims? Is there a match between what they're saying the market is and what they'll be able to get to with their go-to-market strategy with what they've put in their financial projections? Because often I see pitches where they say, we're going to reach this number of customers. And when you look at the financial projections, they're out of whack with how much they think the market is altogether. They haven't joined these things up sometimes. And is there enough profitability there? I think I was always told something which is a reasonable maxim, I think. When you look at the cost of developing something and the price that you want to sell it at, you've got to get this around 70, maybe 80% above what the cost is, because all that other margin will go on other things that you hadn't anticipated: workforce, office space, logistics, and so on. So make sure there's a decent margin between how much it's costing them to develop something and how much they can sell it for. And then, does the value scale enough over time to give you a decent exit valuation? Then 9th, relationships. So I ask myself, could I have a workable relationship with this founder? I'm not looking for him or her to be my new best friend, but are they likable? Opinionated? Sure. Assertive? Sure. An authority on their subject? Sure. Arrogant? No. But are they able to do some basic human skills like build a rapport with someone, have a trace of empathy or humility? And I think when you ask if someone is likable, I don't mean necessarily that, you know, they're warm and cuddly. I mean, I like people that are, stand up for themselves, are ballsy, have got some courage. But aside with that, you know, I'd like to think I can get on with them. And then lastly, 10th, resilience. Every founder is going to meet setbacks, often on almost a daily basis. And the question is, can they keep getting back up again? And I think it might have been Muhammad Ali that said years ago, it doesn't matter how many times you get knocked down, it's the number of times you can get back up again that really matters. And I like to think of Tom Cruise, because he keeps coming back with, you know, Mission Impossible 7 or whatever it is. But you hear stories every time, you know, that he's broken another bone or he's crashed his motorcycle again, or, you know, you wonder how many intact bones he's got left in his body. But he still keeps getting back up and making another version of Mission Impossible. So final thoughts for angels, in no particular order. There is no rush. You don't have to rush into making an investment. If you've got 100,000 euros that you think you want to invest, take your time. You can split it over 10 investments over 2 or 3 years. And in that time, just learn about, you know, how angel investing works. See as many pitches as you can, see as many pitch decks as you can, meet as many founders as you can, weigh it all up. You know, there's no need to rush in. Don't invest what you can't afford to lose. That's obvious. Ask other angels' opinions on investments, but make your own decisions, come to your own judgments. No one has all the wisdom. You're just as likely to be right or wrong as most other people. Understand the common reasons why companies fail. You know what a post-mortem is. It's an investigation into why somebody dies that usually involves, you know, cutting the top of their head off, taking their brain out, you know, and cutting the full length of their body and examining all their organs and so on. Well, you can do what's called a pre-mortem. And a pre-mortem asks the question of founders, if you were to fail or if you were to die, what do you think it would be caused by? And it's really interesting to see whether they're going to come up with an honest answer. Because more, as I said, more companies fail than succeed. And, you know, the obvious reason, the most common reasons are things like there just isn't a market for the product or the idea that they've got. Sometimes they make up the fact that there's more of a market than there is because they're desperate for the money and they've got an ego and they want to get out there as a business and all of that. Timing. Often the opportunity has been and gone. You know, if you were to say at this moment in time, would you launch a new social media platform? Well, we've just had Threads come along to take Twitter on. So how much room would there be left in the market, you know, for you to compete? That seems to me the timing has passed. It might not stop you making a bit of a success of it, but for one, I wouldn't invest in it. And then competition, for example, there might be too much competition in a space. I might give you an example like dating apps. There are so many dozens of dating apps. I can't think of an angle that anybody can come along and offer to a new way of developing a dating app, you know, new insights into dating apps that hasn't been tried by someone before. Then I'd say don't be swayed by groupthink or the unconscious biases we are all likely to experience. the way we stereotype people, particularly when it comes to female founders, older founders. Not every successful founder looks like a Harvard graduate or Mark Zuckerberg. You know, there are people from all walks of life with brilliant ideas that, you know, they're worth taking a look at. So lastly, ask founders about their attitude to exit. You're not here to give them money to fund their lifestyles. You know, what a founder is for, sorry, what an investor is for in the world is to help a founder grow a business so that at some future time, you can both share in the return that that business is going to make from exiting the business. Anything less than an exit is, you just haven't got anywhere, you know, in my opinion. So those are the thoughts I'd finish with, that I'd leave you with, and I'd like to say thank you for the time to talk about my thoughts about investing. I just flashed the book again. It's available on Amazon. A lot of my ideas are in the book. If you're well, you're in Romania, or you might be elsewhere, you can buy both a paperback version and a Kindle version, so that you don't have to pay the postage, you know, to send it halfway across Europe. So
I think we got the Kindle version, Phil.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much, and I'm more than happy to have a discussion, answer any questions.
I'd like to ask you, Phil, you've got these 10 things which are important. How many of them do you need to go ahead and make an investment? No, because
how many of those 10?
Yeah.
Oh, I've never done that, to be honest, but I really have to believe in the person, I suppose. You know, top of my list. I can put the story second to how I rate the person themselves, you know, how I believe they'll bounce back. And I've heard some other, you know, more famous angels. I'm in no way, you know, famous, but I've heard one say, Paul Graham, I think, from YC Combinator, say something like in the past, sometimes I don't even look at the pitch deck. You know, I'm just interested in the qualities or attributes of this person. And, you know, if they impress me, then I'll believe they can come up with a good idea.
Interesting, because I don't think you can ever get to 10, you know, you're going to check all 10 of those boxes. No. And I would still agree with you that for me, it is about the people and the team.
Yeah.
Mircea, you had a question?
Yeah, how can you assess the personality of a person, of a founder or founding team, just in one or two calls, which we usually have? Because it's kind of hard to really dive deep on the personal level and connect and see the attitude just from two calls. I mean, it can be deceiving to some extent.
I'd absolutely agree with you, and it is really difficult.
Do you have a way to deal with this, or how do you?
You make so someone comes along to pitch, and they've got 5 or 10 minutes, and you know, you have a first impression of them, and it would be worth sharing your first impressions, you know, outside the earshot of the founder that's pitching, and then you meet them again, and I often meet somebody on a one-to-one basis, you know, maybe for an hour. I meet some of the team, and I think if I'm not well, and then you can do other things. You look at their LinkedIn profile, you see the kind of stuff they post. You know, are they active in their community? You can talk to other people that might have invested in an earlier round, possibly, to see, you know, are they giving that person the are they giving them the kind of information on a fairly regular basis that the that you imagine the investor would like? Are they keeping them updated? And I come to a view, I try not to be rushed. It might take me a few weeks, but if I'm not comfortable with them in the end, then I won't invest.
Checking TikTok or Facebook as well.
Thank you. Thanks. I have a question as well. So from your point, which of them can be objectively evaluated? Maybe the finance and the projections, and how much based on personal feeling about what they're presenting for you?
You can make, I think, you can make a reasonable judgment about how much work have they put into attempting to prove that a market exists, and how much, and on the basis of that, because a financial projection has to be based on some proof that a market exists. Otherwise, you're kind of missing the vital ingredient, like, how many customers are there likely to be and how much will they pay? And the thing we don't do, which is, I don't know how common it is in Romania, but we, in the UK, for example, in the more senior job space, we would do psychological profiling of people. We would do personality tests and assessments. But nobody seems to do that or talk about doing that in the angel investing space. And you can offer somebody a job that might be, I don't know, 40, 50,000 euros a year salary, and you put them through a whole raft of psychometric testing. But then along comes a founder and you're thinking that you might give them millions. And there's no testing at all in terms of, whether they're going to deliver on the job or not. So it is, I'm joking a bit, but there is a bit anomalous in a sense.
Okay, thanks.
The analysis points and the points of views you mentioned about analyzing the startups were pretty much related to the founders and the company itself. Are there any other strategical reasons which might outweigh these from a portfolio perspective of investing in a certain vertical, a certain market segment, a certain supply chain to protect other investments?
I didn't hear all of that very well. Emma, would you?
Let me just repeat.
Yeah.
The analysis points you mentioned were related to the founder and the company.
Yes.
Are there any other points related to the portfolio, investing in a certain vertical or needing some investments to protect other investments, or more strategical decisions that are not related to founders or companies?
Yes.
Or specific founder or specific company?
Yeah, I think in my experience, and I'm I suppose in one camp. I don't have a very narrow set of sectors or one sector that I invest in. I choose two or three, and they're not necessarily interdependent with each other. Whereas there are other very sector specific, say medtech, deep tech, for example, fintech, where people will only invest in those. I think if you were given the opportunity to invest in one because you wanted that to do better than a competitor, that's a it's an interesting but also a very individualist kind of view that is up to you, and it's not something that single-handedly, with your relatively small investment, that you could influence. But I could see that institutional investors might be making those kinds of decisions if they're willing to put in several £1 million into one investor to give it a leg up over a competitor. Then why not?
Questions online?
Are these managing this so we can check?
How do you have any questions online?
No. It's fine.
Was one just from my side, but you kind of put it in the beginning, Emmett. Mainly because you Phil mentioned about the 10 things, and my question was how many of them are non-negotiable?
Yeah.
Somehow Emmett put a similar question, which you answered.
Yeah, and I think I invested in someone, you know, and if I'd known this, I just wouldn't have gone ahead with it at all. So my due diligence failed. I invested in someone who had a co-founder that I subsequently discovered that their co-founder had been to prison for embezzlement. You know, and I didn't invest a great deal, but I thought I only wish I'd known that before. You know, that would have been about the biggest red flag I could have imagined. So.
And in the end, the investment was a bad one?
Well, it's still alive, but it's doing or not doing lots of things that I would have wanted it to do. I very rarely get investor reports from them, and they pay a very small dividend that's about 0.1% of their, you know, worth. And I suspect, although so I haven't named who they are, so I've no fear of saying this. I suspect they've siphoned off a fair amount of the investment to found another business that is probably doing better than the one I've invested in.
Interesting.
Might be time for an investigator.
Yeah. Well, and then they, you know, shortly after they finished raising the investment, they moved their office base from the UK to some little island somewhere where there's hardly any jurisdiction. So
Yeah, there's a red flag.
yeah.
So I don't remember the startup which out of the 15 investments which is sending investment reports. Is there any?
Yeah, sure, yeah. Licenseware, for instance. Licenseware, I think Telios.
And they but very few, it's like 30% of them. But I was curious, at the beginning when you started investing, did you build a portfolio strategy on how to focus yourself as an investment thesis, or you just went along with the flow with what kind of startups were coming towards you? How was it, more intuitively or more organized and sharp? Your building strategy.
I'd have to say that I was completely naive. I started investing in what I believe sounded like a good story without any great thought about. I don't think people even talked about an investment thesis 15 years ago. I think it's a relatively more recent addition, you know, and probably at that time there were in the angel group I was in, there were generic general investors, and there were one or two people that, you know, were specialists, and the main group I was a member of was in a well-known university city, and a lot of the people that came along to pitch were university spin-outs from the university, and I learned more about the various types of semiconductors than I care to know about in the first few years of being a member. I hadn't got a clue what a semiconductor was when I joined, and by the time I left there, I probably knew more than I'd ever need to know about semiconductors, because I know I use them in everyday life, you know, they're in all my devices, but what they do, I don't really know. So
Yeah, research and university startups, related startups are kind of starting now to pop up in the ecosystem in Romania. What is your impression about what happened in your area? The evolution, the investments were fruitful, people were too technical and didn't manage to pull the business side. What were the challenges there in the research or university-based startups?
A couple of things I would say, probably more common than anything else. The founders themselves were very technical people. You know, they'd got PhDs, you couldn't fault them for their technical knowledge, but they lacked some other basic requirements like proving there was a market, being able to relate to people, and so they're pitching, you know, you were wanting to explore more about, you know, if you were to invest, how are you going to prove there's a market out there, because this is kind of a product driven invention that you've come up with, but you know, I'm not that convinced that that you prove there's a need for it, that there are customers that want to buy it, although, you know, you proved it works, whatever it is. And the second thing I'd say is that the universities themselves were often too greedy in taking too high a percentage of the equity of the company, and not leaving enough equity for the founder to be able to sell, you know, their share of the equity. So founders sometimes found themselves in a position where they were pre-seed, you know, but they only owned 70% of the company to begin with. And you think, well, the university has shot them in the foot by taking too much equity from the beginning, and they've rendered them with something that's possibly unsaleable, because the universities themselves didn't appreciate how the ecosystem worked.
Has that changed more recently because of that problem?
From what I've read, it has. I'm not still associated with this group, but from what I've read more generally, universities have reined in their the level of which, you know, at which they want a share of the business, and you know, and it's kind of basic maths, isn't it? You know, like 5% of a £50 million business is worth more than 20% of a business you can't sell. So, you know.
One more question.
Yeah, sure.
So we often see here in Romania startups which are spinning off from IT companies. So a software development company which decides to do a product and then they spin it off as a startup, and oftentimes it's 100% owners of the IT company. They're also owning the startup. Sometimes involves fully, so transitioning, but as well startup studio style, in which the startup studio owns already at pre-seed 30% of the company. So how do you tackle these things which are spin-offs, but from the business perspective, from the business companies, not from universities? Have you invested in them? Do you trust them as a startup? Because it's not like just three people getting together to do a startup, but it's more like institutionalized in a way.
Yes. I have a kind of suspicion about some of them, or the ones that I've seen. It depends what they're building, you know, and what they're putting out there. That, you know, they might build a platform or they might build an app. And I guess on the one hand, you think, well, if you've got a platform idea you know, where you create a two-sided market, you know, with network effects and whatever, then, you know, given that more than 50% conduct their business on their phone rather than at a desktop, then an app is going to, you know, be an obvious adjunct to what you're doing. And I think, you know, that's probably more so in the business to business sector. I think in the business to consumer sector, my question then is, you know, ask a group of people what apps they commonly have on their phone and the ones they most use. And, you know, they come down to a handful of apps. And then you're asking people to maybe through a freemium model, you know, upgrade to a paid version of an app. And I do wonder about founders' expectations about customers' capacity to ever increase the number of apps they'll be willing to use, because we just don't. There's too much noise in the world. You know, we can get by in life most of the time with half a dozen probably maximum apps. So what space or room is there to add anything else?
Anybody else, some other questions?
If I may, I want to ask about the due diligence, since you mentioned that case when the guy had let's say, criminal record.
Yeah.
How do you normally do due diligence? Do you do it on your own, or is it that you do it with a group of investors?